All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John with Murder by the Book, coming to you with another live virtual event. We only have a handful of these left so far for this year, but we're really excited to be talking with Jeff Lindsay with us tonight. He is going to be telling us about Fool Me Twice, which is the second book in his Riley Wolfe series. He is the author of, as I mentioned, the Riley Wolfe novels and the New York Times bestselling author of the Dexter novels, which debuted in 2004 with Darkly Dreaming Dexter. How are you tonight, Jeff?
Well, I might live. I mean, so far, at least. How are you doing?
Doing well. I think I might live is like an absolutely perfect answer to that question this year. I might live.
Yeah, it's not certain at this point.
Yeah. So everybody, if you are joining us either on Facebook or YouTube, if you have questions for Jeff, you can post those in the comments, and I will leave some time after he and I have chatted to get those to him. So don't feel shy. Definitely ask some questions. So, Jeff, to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about the Riley Wolfe series and the new book, Fool Me Twice?
Well, in fact, I can. In fact, I can't think of anyone else who could do it quite as well. So, Riley Wolfe he's not just the greatest thief in the world. He does it not for the financial rewards, but because people tell him it can't be done, and more particularly, you can't do it. That's what started him in his childhood. There was a series of traumas, and they were bad enough that they twisted him. The backstory for all this is in book one, Just Watch Me, now available in paperback. And it's turned him into a guy who does impossible things because they're impossible. He has a special grudge against the 0.1% of the super rich who were born into it and feel entitled and empowered. And he's not a cold killer like Dexter was, but if somebody is in the way, he doesn't mind killing them. And if they're in that 0.1%, he takes a little extra pleasure in it. So this time around, his task is he's kidnapped by one of the most dangerous and ruthless men in the world, an arms dealer named Patrick Boniface. And Boniface tells him a story of when he was in prison. The only thing that gave him hope was this one particular picture, which happens to be a fresco. And he says, I want you to steal it for me. And here's the problem. A fresco is a kind of painting that is painted into the wet plaster when the wall is made, so that the painter has a picture, a plan of what he's going to paint ready. It's called a cartoon, no relation to Bugs Bunny. He has to paint it quickly onto the drying plaster before the plaster dries. Now, when that's done, the painting, and The Last Supper is a perfect example, the painting is actually a part of the wall. Yeah. So Boniface has actually told Riley he wants him to steal a wall. Now, I could think of a dozen ways that you could steal a wall, maybe, but to keep the picture intact makes it close to impossible. And here's the thing. This wall happens to be in the Vatican, which is one of the most secure locations on Earth. And Riley looks it over, and, there are some things that are just impossible. And this is one, and it's not, oh, yeah, I can do it. No, it's impossible. But if he doesn't do it, he dies, and his love interest, Monique, dies, and that's pretty much end of a story. So he's got to find a way to do it.
So yeah, a fresco definitely not something you can just waltz into a museum, toss in a suitcase, and wander out with.
No, and the funny thing is, I've been amazed at how easy it has been for a lot of people to steal a painting, which you might think, okay, well, a fresco is a painting, but it's a wall.
Yeah. So with the series, like you said, some of his motivation is people telling him this is impossible, you can't do this. So how do you go about kind of planning out these fictional heists that seem impossible?
Oh boy. Well, at first I thought that was impossible for me. I've never been I've been diagnosed as ADD. So I'm not really good at concentrating and coming up with complicated plots.
Mhm.
But each Riley Wolfe book has to have a complicated plot. So it takes me weeks and weeks of walking around and swearing and breaking dishes and moving little pieces around until I finally come up with it. Because I really have to have it all done, all laid out neatly before I start.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'll get into page 94 and go, oh, wait a minute, I already killed that guy. That's no good. I don't know what to do now.
Mhm.
So it takes a lot. What we say down here in the South is it's a job of work. Y'all say that in Texas? I don't
Mhm.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a job of work. Yep.
Mhm. So as you're planning them, I imagine, finding museum security information and stuff like that is not something you can just like easily stumble across on the internet. So how do you do your
Weird. They're kind of close with that. I don't know why. I mean, if it was, I would trust me with it, but they get funny about it.
Yeah. So how much of the like them being able to get into a museum and pull the heist and doing stealing? So how much of that is like info that you've been able to find from things that have actually happened, and how much of it is like, since people kind of don't know how this stuff works, you can just make it up?
I try not to make up too much. I want it to be authentic. I don't want people who know, the scene maybe to go, whoa, wait a minute. I found this out early on in my writing career. It's especially true with guns. That you'll say something about firing a weapon, and all the gun nuts write in and go, no, that's impossible. The Glock 17 has a magazine. So, but it's true of anything, and with art in particular, it's almost like guns. People know their stuff. So I have to do the research. It's a little harder now because I can't travel,
Yeah.
but I couldn't have traveled to the Vatican anyway, I don't think. And they're very close, and they don't take exceptions like, excuse me, I'm a best-selling author. I wanted to know what sort of security you have. They're like, no. Oh, and it's funny, I learned some important things because in Italian, when they say no, it's no. So pretty much the same.
Yeah. So do you kind of have a running idea of items that you want to try to steal for other books in the series?
No, I know I really should, but each book is different, and I start out trying to find something. With the first book, Just Watch Me, I was sort of, for several weeks, I was running around going, on Google, the world's most valuable prizes, the world's most valuable artistic treasures, on and on and on, until I stumbled across the crown jewels of Iran, which are mind-blowing. And for this one, it was like, okay, in Just Watch Me, he did something impossible. How do I top that?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how it happened, but eventually it evolved to, yeah, have him steal a wall from the Vatican. That's impossible. And as it turns out, it really is, but no spoilers here.
So, and you mentioned, not research being difficult because you're not able to travel. So what are some of the challenges of writing books like this that have a little bit more of an international flair to them than the Dexter books?
Well, as you've already said, the challenge is the research. A lot of the places I've been to, and I use memory, a lot of places, I've been really lucky in that the Dexter books got me to travel around the world, really, and I made friends around the world. So just for example, for Fool Me Twice, this new book, available wherever fine books are sold, a lot of it involves French people and French locations, and I have some really good friends in France. I started out like most Americans with a slight prejudice against France, but on my third or fourth trip there, as I started to make friends, I really love the place. So I have some very, very close friends, close enough that at least one of them there I would ask to be my pallbearer. Not that I'm in any hurry for that. And they went through and doctored the French, any place in the book where they speak French, and the locations and the bureaucratic institutions I talked about. And I've been really lucky that I can do that in most cases. Either I have a friend or I have a connection that I can ask about it. If that answered the question, it can't have been a very good question.
So you mentioned when the first book came out that you had the idea for this series kind of rolling around in your head for a while. So what made you finally decide that it was time to tackle Riley Wolfe and the series?
Actually, it was my editor. I had an idea that wasn't really Riley Wolfe yet. It was just, it was a con man. And in talks with my editor, he kept pushing me and saying it's really not enough. And it evolved to where con man is just one of the tools that Riley Wolfe uses. It's only part of who he is. And I worked with a psychologist and, researched the character and worked it out with her until I came up with the character that is Riley Wolfe.
So it sounds like before you even kind of get pen to paper, there's a lot of pre-work that goes into it, whether it's like you said, research for the characters and plot-wise. So do you stick pretty heavily to kind of that early outline that you work on when you're doing that?
With Riley Wolfe, as I said before, I have to, because the plots are so intricate. There's always a couple of surprises, and you have to be open to them because they're usually pretty cool. Things you wouldn't have thought of until you were deep enough into the story to know all of the details. And it's the new details that you've learned that make this new surprise. One of the best examples from early on in the books, the reason Dexter proposes to Rita is that he has taken a finger off of a corpse, and the corpse finger has a ring on it. And Rita finds it and goes, "Oh, Dexter, yes, I will, yes." Now, that just popped into my head when I had him cut the finger off. But as it turned out, it's one of my favorite details. Things like that happen in every book. And although I do have to stick to the outline, I have to be open to those too, because they're usually pretty funny.
So it sounds like kind of a lot more of the plot stuff is definitely more outline, and some of that character stuff is just kind of what can surprise you as you're getting into it.
Yes. Yeah, especially with the Riley Wolfe books. They, as I keep saying, they are really heavily plotted. They have to be. It's it's a heist story, basically, with a body count, and so there's so many little details and subplots. I have to stick to it.
Yeah. So did you go back and like revisit any, when you were kind of setting out to do this series, did you go back and revisit any of your like favorite like kind of heist and con novels or books?
I don't think I have any, to be honest. It's just, this is what the character requires, and it's not like I've been reading heist books my whole life. I can't think of any that I've read. The only heist movie I can think of, other than the Ocean's 11 series, is Top Copy. When I was a kid, which I watched because I really liked Peter Ustinov. So I don't know. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm being arrogant, but I'm kind of making it up. I don't really have any influences in the genre.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because a lot of the reviews kind of compared it to the Ocean's movies, and then so the Houston Chronicle actually said that in the first book that they thought it was kind of a classic pulp adventure. So were you inspired by pulp adventures at all for these?
Pulp, as in the 1930s stuff?
Yeah.
I don't know that I was inspired. I read a bunch. When I was a kid, my father saw me reading Edgar Rice Burroughs, which actually was a huge influence on me. And he said, "Oh, you like the pulp stuff? Here's some I read when I was a boy." And it was, what was his name? G3, The Flying Ace, and Doc Savage and stuff like that. So I read some of them. I don't know. I got a little weary of them because the characters tend to be one-dimensional. Doc Savage is like the early Batman. Whatever happens, he goes, "Aha, I'll take this from my utility belt. No problem." And you get tired of that. I like an obstacle that is going to stop you unless you're really good. And the pulps never offered that. But yeah, I did read a bunch of them.
So, in another interview, somebody asked you about the character of Monique, who was the art forger in the series, and you talked about that you were when you were growing up, you were always in art galleries and around artists, and you mentioned kind of your father telling you to watch out for fakes.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, my father definitely knew his fakes. He was an art historian, as well as a pretty good painter. In fact, a couple of my favorite paintings in the world are done by my father, and not just because of the sentimental value. But yeah, I was always in art galleries and so on. And at one point, he was the director of an art gallery in Miami. Mm-hmm. And he made the mistake of saying of a new acquisition, I think it was Van Dyke. This might be a Van Dyke. And it turned out not to be. It was a really good fake. And the newspapers and the tenure committee and everybody just roasted him. So he was always careful about that afterwards. And when I started writing about, art and so on, he sent me like 5 books on how to tell a fake. So it was a sensitive subject for him. Yeah. And it got me interested, which is where Monique came from. Apparently, it's not that hard to fake a masterpiece. The hard thing is getting it past the experts. And I've had some incredibly fascinating friends, one of whom found an unknown Leonardo da Vinci. Wow. And he told me stories about trying to get it authenticated. And a lot of the people, like famous art scholars, said, look, there's no doubt it's authentic, but I won't authenticate it unless you feed the poochie. Yeah. So there's a lot of corruption there. Like with everything else, especially lately, I learned that you can't really trust anything, even from the experts. But it became an incredibly interesting subject for me, and I like exploring it with Monique and Riley.
So, what's the thing that surprised you the most when you've kind of dug into the art world for research?
There weren't a lot of surprises because, as I said, I grew up in the art world. Yeah. My parents had to go to a lot of openings and so on. So, an early version of babysitter for me, by the time I was 6 or older, was sit over there and drink some punch. We got a schmooze. So I grew up in art galleries. I knew the art world, especially the academic art world. And there haven't been any real surprises, I guess. I mean, it's not my world, but it's a world I grew up in.
So Jamie has asked in the comments, hi, Jamie, thanks for tuning in tonight. She wants to know what's next for Riley.
Something impossible. I'm sorry if that's a spoiler. I'm working on book 3 right now. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I mean, with me, a book is always like a newspaper, as if I'm writing the whole paper. One downside of that is that when the book is done, I tend to forget about it. And if someone asks me, what about that book you wrote 10 years ago? I go, did I really? What? I don't know what you mean. I don't remember. Yeah. I truly could not tell you how many books I've written, how many plays I've written, any of that. It's just when it's done, I forget it. But for the new book, it's I don't want to do any spoilers. It's not set in stone yet. Gotcha. But the reason I brought up the newspaper thing is it's things I've been thinking about. That's what goes into the book. So the new one is going to deal a little bit with national security and patriotism, which are things I'm thinking about a lot right now. Incredibly important. I don't want to see patriotism redefined as inflicting violence on people we don't agree with. Yeah. And so that's, as I say, if you write every day, you can't help but put in things that you're thinking about. It flows in whether you want it to or not.
Yeah. So going along with that, one of the questions we've been asking people, and I'm sure authors are asking themselves a lot this year, is because especially if you're writing something that's like kind of a contemporary thriller and kind of that everyday current stuff starts to seep in, do you think that the coronavirus is something that you will approach in the books at all? Is it something you think you'll just kind of gloss over?
That's a really good question. I thought about it really hard. I'm still thinking about it, but what I have decided, I reserve the right to change my mind. What I've decided talking to people who read my books and like them is that the books are, kind of an escape and a way out. And so I don't want to give people an escape where you suddenly go, and then the virus came and you're right back into the world that you're trying to escape from. Mm-hmm. So at the moment, I'm ignoring it. I'm, half the country lives in an alternative universe anyway. So I'm offering another alternative universe, I guess.
Yeah, that seems to be an answer for a lot of people, both authors and readers. That like you said, people are kind of using books, especially now.
Because it makes me feel better, and that's important.
Yeah, and that nobody necessarily wants to pick up. It's really interesting when we were talking with Michael Connolly, I guess about a month ago. He writes his books, he turns them in like in the middle of the summer for them to come out in the fall. So he was actually able to, since part of it was in March, was actually able to put in some of that early kind of people wearing masks stuff and not get too heavily into it, but just kind of acknowledge it. And that was interesting to see somebody who was kind of already jumping in there. So we talked a little bit about, you said kind of not really digging into kind of heist novels, a little bit of pulp reading when you were younger. So if you were picking something up to read for pleasure, what is it?
What I've always liked to read for pleasure is historical fiction, sometimes biography, fantasy and science fiction, like that. Believe it or not, at the moment, I'm rereading something I've read a dozen times before, which is the Patrick O'Brian series of novels about, Aubrey and Maturin, which it's not just, really good genre writing. It is a brilliant literary achievement. There are 18 books in the series. Each one gets better. And the depth of knowledge alone should make them something that everyone needs to read. But aside from that, they're brilliantly written. The guy was an amazingly good writer, and I learn something about writing every time I go through the series. So every couple of years I reread it, and this just happens to be the time.
Yeah. So when you're reading stuff, is it, you said like with this one, you kind of learn stuff about writing. Are you able, if it's something that you're really enjoying and digging into, like for the first time, are you able to kind of turn off the writer brain of it and just be able to enjoy the story as a story? Or are you always thinking like, this is how this person did it and this is how this works?
I mostly turn it off, but every now and then he does something that I go, whoa! And it makes the writer brain jump into the forebrain. But most of the time it's just, I'm enjoying it as a reader.
Yeah. So if not having not read kind of a lot of kind of high stuff, mystery stuff, what made you decide when you were just starting the Dexter series and just starting to write, what made you want to tackle the mystery world?
I'm not really sure. Dexter, the first book was intended to be a one-off, because who would want to read about a serial killer?
Yeah.
And I thought if once I told the story, it would be over. Silly me. With this, as I said before, it was something that I hammered out with my editor, who I trust to, have his finger on the pulse. And if I come up with an idea I think is good and he thinks nobody's interested in, I kind of have to trust him, which I did because I had 3 or 4 ideas before that he said, no. And I thought they were great ideas. So it's not really the genre or anything else. It's a matter of evolving the idea to where I like it and the editor likes it at the same time.
And so when you started pitching the idea of the Riley books, were you doing it with wanting them to be a series in mind, or did you potentially think the first one was going to be a standalone as well?
No, I've always wanted to write a series. I don't know why. I guess all of the books I loved growing up were series, starting with Edgar Rice Burroughs
Mhm.
And as I got older, Nero Wolfe, Travis McGee was huge because I'm a Florida guy.
Yeah.
And it was just like, yeah, when I finally reached the point where I thought I want to do this, it was always a series that I wanted to do.
Yeah. And so those ideas that you said that you had that your editor was like, no, maybe those aren't going to work. Are those something that you will hold on to and think maybe they just didn't work at this right time and you might come back to them later, or are they just dead and you've moved on?
No, I'm absolutely saving them because I put so much work into them.
Mhm.
A couple of them, the book is like one chapter or two chapters from being finished.
Wow.
Because a few years ago, before all of this feces started, I was really going at a clip that I'd never hit before. I was doing 25 or 30 pages a day.
Wow.
And in the morning, I'd write 10 pages on one project, have lunch, come back and write 10 pages on something else, have a cup of tea or coffee, and then go, all right, 5 or 6 more pages on something else. So I actually have about 3,000 pages of a fantasy series, which I thought was terrific, but nobody wants to read a fantasy series by me. And I have 2 almost complete novels on ideas that the editor didn't buy, and a file of 10-page pitches aside from that. So I don't remember what the question was, but I hope that answered it because I've just run out of words. So
Yeah, no, that's good. So for people who might be tuning in for the first time and not have been able to hear you talk before, I know you've talked about this when you were at the bookstore. How did you know that it was time to start, speaking of series, how did you know when it was time to start wrapping up the Dexter books?
Well, I wasn't really keen on the idea. The editor said it was time. My wife was suggesting it was time. And I didn't really want to. Like I said, all I've ever wanted was to write a series. But, all things must pass. I say that because that's George Harrison, and we're just a few days past John Lennon Day, God bless him.
Yeah.
So, if I have to do it, I have to.
Yeah.
And I went through a real grieving process for a year or so, and I didn't know that's what was happening until I went, why am I feeling this way? Why am I unable to work? What's going on? Oh, you must be grieving. Yeah, that's what it is. So then it was, I knew it was time to move on, but I just didn't have anything to move on to.
Yeah.
And it took a couple more years to come up with the next thing.
And do you think at some point you might dip back into that world? I know kind of reboots and things like that are so kind of a big deal now. I was just reading that Disney Plus is just greenlit 47 sequels to everything under the sun. Do you think you might dip back into the Dexter world at some point in the future?
It's a door I will never close. As we've seen, the TV show is doing another 10 episodes. It's a limited series. Yeah, you didn't know that?
I didn't know that, no.
My goodness, I thought everyone knew. Yeah. There's going to be a limited run at one time only, 10 more episodes. I think they're trying to beg for forgiveness for the last episode of the original run. But that's I think it starts filming in a few months. I can't remember now, but it's all set to go. The original cast is on board. The original showrunner is on board, which is important too, because he did a great job. I would never close the door either on doing another sequel. I have some ideas. If you read Dexter is Dead, the last book in the series, the title is sort of self-explanatory. But it's ambiguous at the end too. I always get the word. What is it? Reichenbeck Falls, the Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's that kind of ending. where there's enough ambiguity that I could bring him back if,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe if there's enough money in it, I'll see what I can do. I don't know.
So we've seen the Dexter books get interpreted into TV series, and I know that they were also a series of comics and graphic novels too. What's it like to get to see something that kind of sprung from your brain get to be interpreted by people in a way that like you might not necessarily have thought?
Well, for the TV show, it was unsettling because I worked in Hollywood for a long time, and I know that adaptations never work out. It's always painful, but I got really lucky, and I loved every step of it once I saw what they were doing. They did a terrific job for 8 seasons, and I got no regrets with that. With the comic books for Marvel, I wasn't as happy because I wrote them, and I never like what I do. But other than that, yeah, it was terrific. And it's, like I grew up on Marvel Comics too.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to work for Marvel and do these things was just an amazing thing. I won't say dream come true because I never thought it could happen, but it was terrific.
So I'm sure you get asked this question all the time, so I apologize for asking it again, but I'm going to ask this question again. So with Dexter and Riley, they're both kind of anti-heroes. So what draws you to those characters, and what makes you want to kind of tackle them with your writing?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I've always felt like an outsider, but I also have always had a pretty strict moral code. And that's kind of the start of defining what's an anti-hero, I guess.
Yeah.
An anti-hero is someone who has a strict moral code, but it isn't necessarily the prevailing societal moral code. Yeah. And I don't know, just all of my protagonists turned out to go in that direction.
Yeah.
It's not like I plotted it out to happen. It just happened.
Yeah. So how do you get into the heads of people like Dexter and Riley, and then kind of go back out kind of about the rest of your life? Do you have so how do you decompress from that?
It's a little bit like being an actor on a long-running sitcom. Mm-hmm. If you're the goofy neighbor, you have 5 lines a week. And that's not who you are. You're not an idiot, but on the show you are an idiot. So at the end of the day's shoot, you take off the costume and hang it up and go home, and you're who you are. And it's kind of the same way, even with Dexter, I would take the costume off at the end of the writing day and, go in and be me again. It was only really hard a couple of times, like when I wrote the Dexter's Delicious, which is about cannibalism. I found some really incredibly disturbing things. There are actual cannibal chat rooms. Oh. And in one of them, I found a post from a 16-year-old girl who said, and this isn't made up, she said, "When I was really young, my father and brothers took me hunting, and they killed a deer, and when they slit the belly open to pull the entrails out, I thought, that's what I want. I'm young, I'm good looking, I'm in really good condition. Please consider eating me at your next feast." And I turned my computer off, and it was not even noon yet, but I went in and I made a really big, strong martini. And I sat in my easy chair and petted the dog for about 2 hours. It was too much to bear. Yeah. There are people like that. And it's, at times it's overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So I've never heard an author kind of describe kind of that way of just being able to kind of put the character on, do their work, and then kind of put that away. That's really interesting.
Oh, well, so few authors are actually me, so it doesn't always work out for the rest of them.
So how has your writing process evolved from starting the early Dexter books to now doing the Riley books?
Well, with the early Dexter books especially, I would get up at like 3 in the morning. Part of that was dictated by my family life, which is the most important thing for me. And I wanted to get the work done early because at the time my wife was producing the evening news, and I was raising 2 little girls all by myself because the wife was away all day, and it was killing her, and it was not easy for any of the rest of us. But I'd get up incredibly early so I could do the writing and, then make breakfast, make lunches, get the kids off to school, and take a nap. So that's kind of evolved. I get up later now, thank you, Jesus. And I write, during daylight hours. I don't know why okay, I do know why. It's a little harder actually, because I found early in the morning, my brain was still half asleep and the stuff just flowed out. I wasn't criticizing. I found that when I'm wide awake and writing, I'll type the and go, oh crap, that's so stupid. Everybody starts a sentence with the. What's a better word? Whereas if I'm half asleep, it's like blah, 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 and I'll do 10 pages and I can edit it later. But if I'm editing myself while I write, it becomes really hard.
So has there been any talk about any film or TV with the Riley series?
Yes, there has, right from the beginning. And we're in the middle of working a deal that I hope will come out.
Awesome.
And I can't give any details because it's not signed yet. But, I'm very hopeful that soon I'll be able to announce it.
Very cool. So if you guys have tuned into the chat late, we have been talking with Jeff Lindsay, whose new book in the Riley Wolfe series, Fool Me Twice, just came out about 10 days ago. And it's the second in the series. We have it, and we also have, of course, copies of the first one, Just Watch Me, which just came out in paperback at the store. We are now open for business. So for people to come in, we've been doing curbside pickup for a couple months, but the store is actually now open for customers to come in and browse. So please feel free to wander in and pick up copies. We know that not everybody is comfortable coming into the store. So if you want to do curbside pickup, we are definitely available through over the phone for curbside and also for online orders, though we do recommend if you're going to do online orders for shipping, you get those in soon because with the holidays coming up, shipping stuff is going to slow down. And we've got a couple more events coming up just this year, as I mentioned, as we started, but definitely keep an eye out on the store's website for all of the stuff that comes up in 2021. Jeff, it's been so great chatting with you this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Congrats.
Pleasure. I look forward to the day I can come back to your store.
We do too. It's been nice to be able to do stuff this way and be able to reach other customers who are not in Houston. And we're excited about the idea of being able to still do some virtual stuff with the in-store stuff, but it's definitely not the same as being able to actually, have you in the store and have fans in and be able to interact that way too. So we appreciate you joining us tonight. Have a happy holiday season and hopefully we'll get to see you soon.
Thank you. You too.
Take care.